When you think of big-time quarterbacks, you don't typically think about them going to Kentucky. Yes, they've had some good quarterbacks over the last few years, but historically, the Wildcats rarely land big-time quarterbacks, and the ones they had landed recently had flipped to bigger schools and viewed the Wildcats as way lower on the totem pole. Coming into the class of 2020, Beau Allen was a big deal. He was a 4-star recruit, had been talked about since he was in middle school, and was the expected next great quarterback for Coach Stoops at Kentucky. He was ranked higher than former Nebraska quarterback Logan Smothers, West Virginia starting quarterback Garrett Green, Kansas State star quarterback Will Howard, and potential first-round quarterback prospect Jalen Daniels from Kansas. Unfortunately, Allen has seen nowhere near the success as those other 4 players, and went from the future of the program and a child prodigy quarterback to FCS football. In today's video, we're going to talk about the rise and fall of Beau Allen and why it isn't over for him just yet. We're going to tell his story, talk about what happened at Kentucky, and what his future will look like. Without further ado, let's go ahead and get started. Going back in time, Allen had someone to look up to in football, as his dad was a star quarterback. His father threw for over 6,000 yards at Morgan County High School in Kentucky, and he decided to play for the Kentucky Wildcats. While he was actually born in Carmel, Indiana, both Kentucky and the quarterback position were ingrained in him. He said, quote, "I was always a fan. I've been here all the time, and I remember Rich Brooks coaching here. It's been incredible improvement with what Coach Mark Stoops has been doing." Early on, everyone in the area knew the name Beau Allen, as he was apparently a big deal as an elementary school student. He had the resources and talent to eventually become a big-time prospect, and he was literally bigger than all the other kids his age. His coach said, quote, "He was the biggest kid around then, and the other kids sort of gravitated towards him and wanted to be on his team. That didn't stop once he got to middle school or high school. He's got that knack of being a natural leader, and what he says, he's honest about it, and he wants to go get it." Eventually, he would arrive at Lexington Catholic High School and was already a huge deal in the area after being pegged as the next big thing. He said, quote, "When you're an in-state quarterback from the Commonwealth and you've got an offer from Kentucky before your sophomore year of high school begins, you're bound to find your way into a pretty big spotlight." That is what would eventually happen, but his first big break would come at a 7-on-7 passing event before his freshman year of high school. At Catholic, his coach said, quote, "Beau's a special kid, and it doesn't take long when you're coaching to see that. I'll tell you, it's been an understatement to say I'm excited about the next 3 years here." As a freshman, he threw for over 1,000 yards and 14 touchdowns with only 3 picks. He was a little bit raw as a prospect, but he had fantastic natural skills and already showed immense potential, which gave him a lot of early buzz. His first 2 offers were from Bowling Green in Eastern Kentucky, but as time would go on, he became a huge early name on the recruiting trail for 2020. He traveled to schools such as USC, UCLA, and Cal, and had also traveled to Texas, Texas A&M, and even Ohio State. He'd get better and better and build on the hype. As flash forward to his junior year, he threw for 3,729 yards, 42 touchdowns, and 9 interceptions. He was listed as a 4-star recruit and was wanted by a ton of high major programs. It seemed that Kentucky was always going to be the school to beat though, as they had his father and former Lexington High School coach, Mike Perry, who went on to Kentucky. At the time, both Georgia and Michigan were also very interested in Beau, and would the Cats once again lose out on a big-time quarterback to a bigger program? People were actually excited and pretty confident about this, but in the past few years, Kentucky had gotten a big-time recruit to commit before a national power would take them away. The 2 big situations that I can personally think of was first Jarren Williams. He was a huge 4-star recruit in the class of 2019, but after being committed to the Cats for months, flipped to Miami. The bigger name though is Mac Jones. Mac was actually a Wildcat for quite a while before he got a late offer from Bama and eventually flipped to the Crimson Tide and then became a first-round pick and a starting NFL quarterback. While losing out on Jarren ultimately wasn't that big of a deal, as he didn't pan out, losing out on Mac was. With Beau, it would not end up happening though, as he would commit to the Cats and was locked in. He said, quote, "I went to Kentucky because of the people around the program and what kind of program I wanted to be a part of and what people I wanted to be around." He had been the top target for Kentucky for quite some time and picked his hometown school over Washington State, Duke, West Virginia, Michigan, Georgia, and Michigan State. He shut down the recruiting process after this and said, quote, "There's no chance that I will flip at all. There have been some times where I thought about doing this announcement at other times, but I know all I need to know about other schools and why I want to go to Kentucky." What did the scouts have to say? Well, they were somewhat mixed on him, but still optimistic. They said he was a highly productive passer who could see the entire field. He threw with excellent touch and placement and can throw the ball into tight windows and will get stronger and faster. Unfortunately, he was not super athletic, was not categorized as a dual threat quarterback and was also not in a very complex system. Still though, he had the smarts and accuracy to be a Power 5 starter, and they said he could be an NFL player if he were to get bigger and stronger and fine-tune his game. This was a huge deal for Kentucky, as they had not signed a 4-star high school recruit since Drew Barker in 2014. Allen would end up a 4-star on some sites, but 247 was a little bit lower on him, as according to them, he was only a 3-star recruit, the number 18 pro-style quarterback, and the 488th best player in the class of 2020. While at Lexington Catholic, he won the Paul Hornig Award as the top high school player in the state, as in his career, he passed for 11,439 yards and 127 touchdowns. While he didn't have the stars next to his name, he lived up to his child prodigy hype well through high school, and now, after being labeled as the future of Kentucky, how would he end up doing? When Beau would arrive at Kentucky in 2020, they would return starting quarterback from 2019 in Terry Wilson, and Beau would just have an opportunity to learn. He'd also be behind former 4-star Auburn quarterback transfer Joey Gatewood, who had recently transferred into the program as well. He'd end up getting a little bit of garbage time in 2020 before he was poised to break out in 2021. It was going to come down to him and Joey Gatewood for the job, but then they brought in Will Levis. He was an under-recruited and underutilized player at Penn State, and he decided to transfer to Kentucky and would ultimately win the starting job. This would be backbreaking to Beau, as he'd end up becoming that third-string quarterback. He would end up appearing in 3 games in 2021 and actually had a rushing touchdown against New Mexico State. The first 2 years at Kentucky for Beau did not go according to plan. It ended up being a tough year for Allen, as now 2 years into his dream school, he would have to make a tough decision. With Will Levis deciding to come back for the 2022 season, Beau saw the writing on the wall and decided to enter the transfer portal. He wanted to play right away, and originally, it looked like he was headed to Western Kentucky. The Hilltoppers were very interested in him, but ultimately, they went with transfer Austin Reed to replace their star quarterback Bailey Zappi. This put Beau in a difficult spot, and he would eventually transfer to Tarleton State. Obviously, they're not an FBS program, but Beau would win the starting job and actually had a pretty terrific year. He threw for 200 yards against TCU, had 4 touchdowns against North Alabama, 3 against Southern Utah, 3 against Houston Christian, and 3 against Mississippi Valley State. Allen would end up passing for 2,800 yards with 23 touchdowns and 11 interceptions. While he needed to cut down on the turnovers, Allen would actually have a pretty tremendous year. Allen would actually have a pretty good year at Tarleton State, and this would be good enough to get him back to FBS football. He announced this spring that he'd be transferring to Georgia Southern, and he's going to have a chance to start right away. Kyle Van Treese is now gone off to the NFL, and it looks like Beau's going to have a chance to play right away. People forget that Clay Helton is now the head man at Georgia Southern, and while his time at USC wasn't always perfect, he was pretty good with quarterbacks, and with a guy like Beau, Georgia Southern could be a breakout team this year, and Allen could come out of nowhere and become one of the better quarterbacks in the conference, if not in the country. He's going to play in a system that, in my opinion, is going to fit his style. Will be playing very much under the radar, so there won't be huge expectations on him, and will get to play for a pretty good coach. While so far, Beau Allen's career has not gone as planned, and he'll always be seen as a huge what-if in Kentucky history, he has still been fighting, has not given up on his football career yet, and the best could be still to come for him. I'm excited to watch him at Georgia Southern this year, and for now, he hasn't lived up to the hype, but it's not over yet. What do you guys think though? If you're a Kentucky fan, what do you think of Beau Allen? Who's another quarterback / prodigy I could take a look at next? And before you go, don't forget to leave a like, subscribe if you're new, and check out all my other videos on the end screen. I hope to see you guys again soon, but until next time, peace.